Pithy Musings, episode number 2. Oh, we got mugs.
We got mugs. Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's better.
You know what? I think it's official if we've got mugs.
I know.
And I hear there's a demand for the mug.
There it is. And we will talk about that at the end of today's episode. So you got to keep listening.
You got to keep listening. So Pithy Musings, we put the funk back into being human. It's funny. I was chatting with someone the other day and they said, what does that mean? Do you want to put some color around what does that mean? Because the word funk, I think people think is depressing. We mean the opposite by that.
And no, we mean like put positive energy out there into the world to find your vibe, to find your sense of belonging through sometimes hard topics, hard conversations that not everybody's comfortable having.
Yeah, it's like funking it up. Right?
Yeah, and making it a safe space.
Yeah.
To be able to have those hard conversations and talk about hard topics.
Speaking of safe space, last time we were talking, Eva, about we have so many ideas, so many topics that we want to talk about. And today's episode is really about psychological safety.
Yeah.
So we're going to dig deep into what that means, why it's important. And like the first episode, we'll provide our listeners, watchers, with some top tips in terms of what we should do if we're not in a psychologically safe environment and how to build that. I think it's a super important topic.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about some of where we've been going with it is, and core to Pithy Musings is also bridging what it is to be a leader in an organization, what it is to be in the workplace, what it is to be in community. And that's one of the things that we really stand for in creating Pithy Musings as well.
And to add to that, I would say, I think we only do this in one take. So I think you're going to see a ton of imperfection, just like you saw in the first one. You're going to see, funny language, perhaps. You're going to see us having fun. And this is just authentically who we are. This is not manufactured. We're not trying to be, you won't hear a lot of corporate speak in terms of our conversation. The word synergy will never leave my mouth.
I'll send you $100.
Please. Right? So since the first episode, in reflection, what was your thoughts of how that was received, how you felt before we dive into episode 2?
Yeah, I love the question. You and I had a pretty interesting conversation following. I just love your mug. We had a really interesting, again, simple pleasures. We had a really great conversation after the first episode because we felt like it's a super vulnerable thing for us to do. It's something we're very passionate about doing and is really meaningful for us. And we finished the episode, we put it up, and we both thought, oh my gosh. And there was a little bit of, was there vulnerability, regrets? Did we say the right thing, the wrong thing? Did we miss anything? Did we offend anybody? And this bizarre thing happened. And yet 99% of us feels really good about what we're doing together and in the world here. So I think some of that conversation happened around, well, hold up here. How do we make each other psychologically safe in creating the container for Pithy Musings? And how do we stay conscious and awake and curious of enabling psychological safety for our listeners and subscribers.
Yeah. And it was super vulnerable because we launched it on a Monday, I think. And then you and I talked, I think, the Tuesday, and we were both like, what did we just do here? Like, do we really want everybody to kind of know what's in our head? And this is where I land with it. Having been in the corporate world for many, many, many moons, I've been in and out of the corporate world in my own, practice. We should probably do introductions again. I forgot about that. But when you're in the corporate environment, there are certain ways of being, right? You become a representation of that organization. Mm-hmm. And so, now that I have Talk and I'm independent, I feel free to be able to do these really vulnerable moves that perhaps I didn't feel like I could in the corporate environment.
Yeah, so I relate to that. And introductions, I'd like to introduce my amazing colleague, Caroline Berglund of Talk. I'm Eva van Krugel of Fervor. Yes, I relate very much to being able to step into, frankly, the power of who we are at our cores.
Yeah.
I remember the day when my husband did a beautiful job of my website. He did my photos, enough promo of husband. My homepage photo is a shocking photo.
It's beautiful. And if those who haven't gone to her site,
and those who haven't gone to the Talk site,
but she's holding up two. What are they?
Like,
sparkles? Yeah,
they're like these. They're like color bombs. And you literally have seconds. You tear the top off and you've got like seconds to hold them up and get it right. And I'm in a tunnel and I'm stepping into who I am. And I remember my husband saying, "You are fervor. You have so much fervor. Just show who you are." And I'm like, "Well, who I am is a lot." And when I put that photo up there, I remember having the question inside my head around psychological safety. Is it safe for me to put this out there? What will people think? What will clients think? What will prospective clients think? Ooh, this is kind of a big risk. And I remember hearing someone say, "That's a really intense photo of you. I think you should maybe go a little more corporate." And I said, "I'm so glad you said that, because I, with all due respect, colleague, will never work with you."
Right.
So it's putting ourselves out there, stepping into the power of who we are. And it's so interesting. So many people are doing that, especially during this pandemic. People are coming out of the woodwork with more vulnerability, more courage, more desire to step into who they truly are, which is fundamentally so positive, with such desire to contribute in the world. They're questioning their confidence, their psychological safety around the risk, all of it.
I think we talked in the first episode, and for those that didn't see it, we talked a little bit about COVID and the pandemic and how it's really important for everybody to kind of show some of their story and reveal their own story. Mm-hmm. I think during the pandemic, it's even more important to create a psychologically safe environment. Mm-hmm. In the absence of seeing people face to face, over the water cooler, not having lunch. How do you do that, right? So that's why we're really talking about psychological safety. I wanted to start, Eva, if you don't mind. The topic of trust has been, and those that know me know that it has been an obsession, candidly, of mine for several years. And I do actually think there's a difference between trust and psychological safety. I think trust is about the individual relationship, where psychological safety is really about team dynamic or community dynamic or organizational dynamic. So the way I look at it is psychiatry versus sociology. That's kind of, we haven't talked about that. I'm curious whether you buy what I'm throwing down or not.
I understand. I think so. And it's interesting because I see psychological safety in relationship with other. and I see trust in relationship with other.
Mm-hmm.
So with you, there's a trust.
Mm-hmm.
With you, we create psychological safety together, and we know that because
Yeah.
there's an interrelationship. But I see both of those things being in relationship with another and how we show up with another.
I'm curious if you have a point of view just on that. And I buy what you're saying, that they're interrelated. I actually do.
So you're buying it? How much?
100%.
But
I listen to you. How do you think you and I developed that psychological safety and trust so quickly? Do you have any theories on that?
I think that we have, so a couple thoughts. One, I think that we have shared values.
Yeah.
On ethics, integrity, what's right from wrong, that you and I are both okay with. We're very open, we're very inclusive, we're very considerate, we're very conscious, we're comfortable saying what we don't know. We're just
a lot.
Right? And in these episodes, there will be things that we maybe say that someone will say, no, that's not true, that's not fair. Then say it, give us a comment, we want to know. We're not, we don't know everything. But to your question, far from it. This is a discussion with us. This is a discussion in the world, and we're encouraging people to participate in the conversation as well. So how did we create trust, shared values? Another thing rumbling in the back of my busy little brain is Brene Brown's trust model, the BRAVING acronym. And for those that aren't familiar with it, look it up. Let's see if I can do it. B for boundaries, R for reliability, A for accountability, V for vault. It's between you and me. I think is for integrity, doing the right thing. N is for non-judgment. And G is for generosity, the belief that someone else is doing the best that they can. And so when I think about that whole spectrum of braving, I know we have each other's backs.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I love that you just brought that up, because your word of the year is brave. Right? So you established a word for 2021. And I remember that because you said, well, what's your word of the year? Sparkly. And what is really interesting, I think I texted you this. I know we're going all over the place here.
It's all connected though. I think it's really, we're being spontaneous, and we create the dialogue, some points in advance, and then we kind of go where nature takes us. So
that's it.
Yeah.
But I was cleaning out I think I was telling you, I was cleaning out the space underneath the stairs in the basement, which is always a bit of a big task, right? But I got some energy over the holidays, and I came across all of my old report cards. So report cards from when I was like 5 and 7 and 8 and 10, like really, really, I don't know why I saved them. I have no idea. Thank you, Mom, if you're listening, for saving them and then giving them back to me. Because what was so interesting is that 2 of the report cards said, Carolyn is such a sparkling light in the room.
Oh yeah.
And I realized that perhaps I've lost that over the years, maybe not so much, but I'm trying to reclaim it. So when we talk about who we authentically are, I want to get back to that sparkly, charming little kid that, so that was an offshoot, but let's get back to, yeah.
I love it, because that also comes back into stepping into the power of who you are, making it safe for yourself and in relationship with others to embrace that.
Yeah. And I think going back to the question of how did you and I create psychological safety? I think it was just a no BS kind of relationship right from the start.
Yeah.
And a real vulnerable one. You talk about the vault. Yes, 100%. I know when I'm talking to clients that I often say, this is like Vegas, right? What goes on in the room stays in the room. Now, we're not going to have cocktails and all of the dancing and all of that, but what goes on in the room stays in the room. And that's really about building teams from a psychologically safe space. Now, just saying those words is not enough. You actually have to walk the talk. So you actually have to nurture that in workshop, but it also can be translated into teams. What I wanted to start though, if you don't mind, like I said,
I never mind. Take it wherever.
this is one of a gajillion books I have.
Yeah.
The decline in trust is still not widely acknowledged to be a problem by either business executives or political leaders. The presence or absence of trust affects our everyday lives and relationships, and yet receives very little attention. There are few books on the topic. It is rarely a subject of conversation in business, and in politics, a lack of openness and honesty are accepted. Now, granted, this was written in 2004, and there has been more discussion around trust and psychological safety. But why do you think, Eva, that it really is the secret sauce for an organization to be successful? That sounds bold, but I believe it. It's the secret sauce. So why is it not at the fore of every executive team, every community? Why are we not talking about it in a real candid way?
I would go as far as to say, I think lack of psychological safety is an epidemic.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I think that the pandemic, the maskers, the non-maskers, the vaccine, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine policy, global events, global issues, faith, belief systems, the diversity and inclusion, equity, sense of belonging, lots of movement around those conversations. It's almost like it's creating, differing views are creating divides. And I believe rooted in judgment and assumption and narratives, in lack of acceptance of that which is not same as me. We hear people, I'm hearing of people saying, gosh, people I was friends with on Facebook are really sharing their views, and I'm really offended, and I don't like that anymore, and I don't trust them anymore. And I therefore either want to change my settings or unfriend them. What should I do? At a community meeting that I was in for some community work that I do. And there's this theme, and it is rooted in, I feel like I can't express myself, what I believe in. And is that also an assumption? So what is our role in creating psychological safety? What are our needs from another? And are we voicing them? And I think the cost, actually, before I go there, what do you think the cost of lack of psychological safety is, be it in community organizations, otherwise?
Yeah, in organizations, for me, it's really quite simple: innovation and creativity.
Yeah.
If you do not have a psychologically safe team and you don't nurture that, good luck, because you are not going to get innovative ways of doing new things, doing old things. You're not going to nurture creativity. You're going to be an organization that continues to do what you've always done. And in this environment, and why I think we're talking about it right now, is psychological safety is paramount. The world looks different than 10 months ago. And if this isn't on your radar and you're a leader in an organization, you really need to start thinking about it in a planful, thoughtful way.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add one more to creativity and innovation, sense of belonging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to that, I know you and I have, both done some work around this space, and we also did some digging to challenge what we think we know, or see who are the top thought leaders in our minds on who's demonstrating leadership in this space. And we'll get to that. There's stories that you and I each have as well on our own experiences, say in the workplace, and what the signs were and how it made us feel. And I actually, we saved it for this moment. I don't actually know what your story is around that. So I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think, before I tell you some of my stories, and boy, do I have a lot, musings on that.
That they're pithy.
So psychological safety to me is a fear of retribution of speaking up. It's what's going to happen to me if I have a different, challenging way of being in the world. And speaking of the word challenging, I know we disclosed that we were both ENFJs. Yeah, we did the Enneagram thing. I'm an 8, which is challenger, someone that sees themselves as strong and powerful, seeks to stand up for what they believe. So you can imagine, I want to challenge in any type of group. That's just part of my natural flex, is to say, why don't we do it this way? Or why do we continue to do that? I have been on teams in the same organization and have had very different psychologically safe experiences. So on one team, there was this dynamic, right, of one person is in silent dissent. I'm not speaking up because I know what's going to happen. We got one person speaking constantly to look intelligent and smart, right? Like, let me just go ad nauseum so that you know how smart I am. You have one person that is buds with another, right? Friends. So I'm going to support whatever that one says. One person that has fear of conflict. So is really just, I'm not going to speak up. And then you have someone like me that's a challenger. In a psychologically unsafe environment, you don't move the needle ever, because everybody's got these roles to play. In the same organization, I was on a different team that was led by a leader that really nurtured and clearly had this notion in his head of how to nurture psychologically safe teams. So what that looked like is he would show vulnerability, but when I presented an idea, and by the way, some of these ideas were pretty wacky, super creative, like really out there. Go, what did you just say? That is awesome. Let's do it. Why not? Let's try it. Yeah. So then I felt I was safe to continue to offer these really wacky ideas. And then everybody else heard it, and they, in their own way, were able to present whatever they wanted. There was never a period, Eva, in that particular team where I felt, you better be quiet. And there was shared and equal space for everyone to speak. So one person never overtook. It was equal, and it became natural. It didn't need to be designed where you say, okay, Eva, you've spoken now, we're going to let Caroline speak. No, it naturally unfolded over time, where we wanted to hear everybody's opinion because we knew that the collective was better than the singular.
Yeah.
Oh, how about you?
Well, so you've had both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And you've known what it was like to exist and lead, and the permission space that you had to keep yourself safe and guarded, or to participate fully. What a difference. And I relate deeply. I'm distracted by a little card on my desk, by the way. I was brave when.
Wait, is that a card or is that a coaster?
Little card from discoverbrave.com. Was gifted to me from a dear mentor, Lori Hillis, who does a lot of work in the Dare Lead space. Bless her.
Yes.
Holding her brave spirit right now. Talk about somebody who's taught me a lot, certainly in the coaching space, around enabling psychological safety in leadership and in teams. And it has definitely challenged me on what I thought I knew way back to my experiences. It's interesting because I come from a place of, I've been in some really dysfunctional environments. And I've also asked myself way back when, if I could do it all over again, I don't have regret. It was all learning. What was my role in creating psychological safety? And if I could practice what I know today, what I think I know today, I think that I may have shown up differently in some former environments, maybe better boundaries, maybe using my voice more assertively. It makes me think of, for years I was in advertising agencies. So I had a marketing career and rose quickly from a young age. So I I wasn't necessarily equipped as I was later on working in the future organizations, which equipped me differently.
Yeah.
And so maybe I was part of the dynamic by enabling it and not being as assertive. But I think back to being in those really tough environments. And I'm not meaning to shame advertising agencies. There are some wicked, innovative, creative shops and amazing people, some of the best people I've known in my career.
Yep.
And I have seen some really tough behavior that I would classify as toxic. You brought up conflict in the workplace. The more I'm learning about conflict, I'm looking back and going, whoa, there were some hot buttons, some really destructive, responses to conflict in the team dynamics, and it was considered okay.
Yeah.
And it came from the top. So for people to slam doors, literally, I mean, I remember writing up a creative brief for a client's brand campaign, and I believed in being collaborative and us being able to work together. And I want my creative director to be like at my side and make sure this is something we can stand by before it goes to a client for approval to inform this whole initiative. And this particular creative director just, I guess, was in the wrong mood. I don't know.
Yeah.
And looked at me, took the document inches away from my face, ripped it into shreds, slammed the door. And I thought, what did I do? It crushed me. I was crushed.
Well, let's sit in that for a second, because I think it's important to understand the ramifications of behaving in that way and how you walked away feeling, right? So you felt crushed, you felt unheard, you felt undervalued, you felt, I'm not putting words in your mouth. Yeah.
I literally don't know what I did. And yet this person and someone else had said to me, I'm so sorry that happened. He's been doing it for years. He's been getting by with it for years. And then when I talked to the president about it, I said, it's not okay. This is not the first time. It's not okay that this person is treating other people as he does. It's not just about me either. I'm talking about our organization and our sense of safety around here. It has got to stop. And I remember this president saying, I hear you. He's so talented. He's so good for our business. Our clients love him.
Don't care.
Is amazing.
Yeah, I would say I don't care. This is the culture that you're nurturing in this organization, is to have this person that frankly is not sharing any of the core values. I mean, we talk a lot about core values, Eva, you and I, is because it really guides how you behave in the universe. This dude that you're talking about clearly didn't have the same core values that you did. And even if the president who said, but he's really good and he's really talented,
unacceptable,
was still allowing all of that to happen.
That's right.
And that is shaping culture.
Yeah. So people, there's a cost, and there was a cost to, did people stay? Did they do their best work? Did we collaborate meaningfully in the ways that we needed to do our best work? And that business was and is all about the strategy and the creative product. So, I mean, this was some years ago, but I still remember that moment. And I remember the spit on my face.
Yeah.
And wiping it off and walking outside and going, what have I gotten myself into? And so I don't share that story because I'm in a victim place at this point.
Oh, yeah, no.
I look back at that, and this kind of thing is still happening, and all too often in varying degrees: shaming, bullying, humiliation, through to what someone may think is subtle, but it's also crushing. Not being open to someone else's ideas or a better way of doing things, or an idea that is perhaps better than someone else's for the job at hand. It shows up in so many places.
I love that you brought up shame, because I think it's really important to talk about it as relates to psychological safety. So that team that I was telling you about, that had everybody had these roles, and I was the challenger role. That leader at that time, in a meeting, shamed one of our newest team members because I think she lost an account, or I can't really remember the details, but in with our peer group and him being the leader, he made this person feel like about this tall. And so the message then becomes, oh goodness, I'm going to white knuckle it all the time. I better not lose an account. I better, instead of, let's walk through the process of what happened so that we can really understand what happened and try our best to not let that happen again. I mean, we said it last time, I'll say it again, perfect doesn't exist.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes, all of us, and it should be, and it sounds cliche, but it really should be a learning opportunity. You know, I'm a nerd, but there's another book I've been reading this week. It's called the Map of Consciousness Explained. And they talk about shame as being kind of on the lowest rung to getting to enlightenment. Again, not getting too out there. But when you see people and you watch and observe people shaming another, well, first it breaks my heart, but recognize that they have a lot of work to do, because it's not coming from a place of kindness or love. It's coming from a place of their own insecurities. So I guess the question becomes like, what do you do if you observe this kind of behavior on a team or in an organization?
Right away, it makes me think of, you know, the whole bystander thing. What do you do?
Yeah.
So it also makes me think of an organization that I had the gift of being part of, a financial institution where culture was prioritized, and they invested so much in their people. So that was sort of my far superior experience. And what we had in place where we could hold each other accountable in the moment.
Wow.
Was a set of 10 principles. And either you were all in. So some people didn't like the all in, and they went through a phase of, if you're not all in, and these aren't things that you feel you can live in alignment with imperfectly, then we'll pay you to leave.
Wow.
Yeah. And so these principles were, for me, they were really comfortable, because things like think big and make it happen, be fiercely accountable. And so if a leader was shooting down an idea because it was going to be more work, or we've done it this way and we just need to continue doing this way, we don't need to disrupt the course, I was in that moment able to go, so, all right, let's come back to the principles that we are sworn into here, cult-like as it may be. I'm curious, are we thinking big in order to make something happen that's really important for who we serve? So we had these mechanisms culturally within the organization that we could use, and it was a practice ground to assert our voices for new possibility, our own wants and needs. And I think that is the closest thing. I'm not saying it's utopia. That is one of the closest things that I have seen in organizational culture that was written on purpose, operationalizing values, prioritizing the people side of doing business. And I just remember, I mean, if anything, the flip side of it happened where there were too many ideas, there was too much going on, and then workload and volume started to explode like a volcano, and we had a different problem, which was, we have so much enthusiasm, there's so many ideas, our workload is insane. So how are we gonna, so that was a different problem, but yeah.
So I was just gonna ask, so, because that is a unique situation, 100%. I mean, we both work with lots of organizations. Lots of people don't actually get so brazen around culture. Who was driving that, Eva?
The most senior leadership.
Yeah.
We had a C-suite with, and again, we were all imperfect beings.
Sure.
And they declared themselves imperfect too.
Mm.
But they were so people focused.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, it was the C-suite working intentionally with other layers of leadership, building in accountability structures. So, you know, other executives, then through to leaders at all levels, through to team members in all roles, were held accountable and measured against our performance. But it wasn't a shaming exercise. It was, hey, which ones are your strong points? Oh, which ones might be ones you want to work on? And what might be some actions that you could take to support working on those? And what support do you need in order to do that? So that was another thing, performance management and feedback from peers. There was a whole system in place that prioritized that. So we were in this movement together. And if someone treated somebody in a way that made them feel psychologically safe, and I haven't, you know, there's one story in the back of my mind, and I know we probably don't have time for it. And we also want to share some of the thought leadership stuff. I remember that this person had totally stepped out of line, made someone feel very psychologically unsafe. There was a ripple effect to making me feel a little bit uncomfortable as well. It wasn't a reprimand situation. It was our president went to this person and said, these 3 principles. Yeah, and that was the conversation. They were even able, in a disciplinary situation, able to come back and go, hey, VP, please reflect on these. Which ones do you think you've shown up on in this situation? Which ones didn't you?
Well, it's also being clear. So obviously we're Canadians, but obviously we're watching what's going on
in our accents.
Well, Peter, my partner, who's British, says I sound very Canadian. I don't know what that means. But, you know, as you're telling me that story and about the most senior people being very clear about expectations around this, yes, it reminds me of Biden. So I don't know if you saw this, but when he was swearing in his staff, and they were doing it virtually. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but they were all virtually. And I don't know if there was hundreds or thousands, but he was standing up and saying basically, welcome to the team. But what stood out for me in that, which feeds into what we're talking about, he seems like a very soft, genteel kind of character. So the assertiveness I didn't expect when he said, and this isn't verbatim, but something to the effect of, let me be really clear. If any of you, or if I hear of any of you being disparaging or ill intent to another coworker, to whoever, let me be clear, you will be fired, and you will be fired on the spot. What I love about that is there's no question where his values around psychological safety, how we're going to treat one another, there's no question. It is stated day one, and you are going to be held accountable to that behavior. And that's really what you were saying in your illustration as well, is that it's not just the leader holding accountability, but it's each other. So if they see each other treating another in a disparaging whatever way, well, you have permission to go and call them out on that.
That's right.
It's not just the leader.
Yeah. And with a shared intention and a shared future vision on what we're creating together, and that we each play a role. I still think it starts with leadership.
Yeah.
And in community, it makes me think of some wisdom shared with me once around, if you can't change the entire world around you, you sure can start with yourself. And so what am I doing as a human being on this earth to contribute to more psychological safety in the world?
Yeah.
What do I do when I'm at the grocery store and I see someone treat someone at the till with disrespect? What do I do? I have a choice. And it actually gets me thinking, like, what do I do? And Do you confront the person? Do you like, what do you do? Or, I can think back to one thing I remember doing. It was in a restaurant and it was with a server, and the customers had left. And I said to the server, I saw what happened and that was hard.
Yeah.
I know that was hard for you.
Yeah.
I want you to know that we're really glad that you're here. And we're really happy with what you do, because this is a treat night for us. So, and the tears. So that's one example of a way to notice and acknowledge, not rescue her.
Nope.
But yeah,
I love that story. And I would encourage our listeners and ourselves to, and remind ourselves that when we see ill-intended behavior, that whether we challenge the person that had done it or not, I think we have a role there somewhere, right? To reach out and say, that must have been hard. Because I believe this. I think people want to be of value and valued. I really believe that. And when others treat other people, not with that, that reverence, yeah, it's always a head scratcher for me. I wanted to take the, right? Like, what's going on here?
I love the visual and I love the expression. I'm going to have to use that.
But I wanted to talk about, in my research of trust and psychological safety, there's one organization that comes up, and for those that have studied this, you'd likely have heard this, but for those that don't, I wouldn't mind exploring it with you. And it's with Google.
Yeah.
The big monster Google.
Yeah.
So they had an entire project, and they codenamed it Project Aristotle.
Yeah.
And I love the Greek philosopher. So Aristotle's the one, and I'm guessing this is why they called it Project Aristotle. That said the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
So they went on this mission within Google, not external to Google, to go like, what makes a team a great team? So in the, I don't know, gajillion thousand people organization, they had an entire team do some research around, why do we have these pockets of brilliance? And then how do we kind of duplicate it? Went over for years. They had an entire team looking at study after study. They had surveys, they had a million things. And they were all, and Google's really good at looking at data. They could not figure out a pattern. There was no discernible pattern.
They're transcribing everything we're saying right now.
Yeah, right?
They're totally going to use it for marketing. I digress. Please continue. And they've done some wicked culture work because they know the value.
Right?
Yeah.
So they looked if teams have all extroverts, does that work? Or all introverts, or a mix, or gender, or tenure, does that matter? Is it high IQ, people with more degrees? What? Couldn't find a pattern. And they finally did find a pattern, and that was around teams that felt psychologically safe. So being able to go into a meeting and not have any fear that I'm going to look stupid or that one is better than the other. The teams that were most successful, bar none, hands down, didn't matter any of those stats, was this.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And a lot of that material and anything we're going to reference in the minutes ahead, there's so much available online and so much very cool thought leadership. So we've curated a few things that really stood out for us. One of the masters of the topic of psychological safety is Amy Edmundson. And when I remember in one of our conversations in our musings of late, you were like, Amy Edmundson. And I think we pretty much were like, oh, I love Amy Edmundson in unison. What a masterful mind and human being. And there was a particular, so she's written The Fearless Organization, Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace for Learning, Innovation, and Growth. And the thing is, even if you and I talk about some of the learnings and thought leadership and principles out there on this topic, there's so much that isn't just about leadership in the workplace, there's so much parallel on how we can show up in community with each other.
Mm.
So there was this particular YouTube video that I watched, and there's just a few points that I just love around this. The idea is that at work, that it needs to be a place that is safe for ideas, questions, concerns, mistakes, where your voice is valued, where there's permission for candor, that it's not about being nice. It's not about holding back on something important or hard to talk about. It's not freedom from conflict either. We can have, in fact, I would argue, there was a pun. I would argue or say that I think we need healthy conflict. The distinction is healthy versus unhealthy conflict. Amy also says it doesn't mean all your ideas will go through.
Yep.
But it's a safe place to be able to share them, even if it's completely wild, even if it's completely inconvenient, even if it means more work, that it's a safe place to share them. And our world needs ideas and creative thinking and invention, especially into the future.
You know what 2 words just came to my mind as you're talking is intellectual friction. You want to increase the intellectual friction and decrease the social friction.
The destructive behaviors within the friction.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other topic, but you talked about it earlier in your explanation of some of your experiences where people kind of withdraw, kind of look away, or some of get emotionally hooked, the shaming, the blaming. Amy also continues that it's not a license to just slack off or to overshare and work out your dirty laundry, or she says to whine. She says psychological safety is a means to a goal. It is not the goal. And that learning in high performance zones sit in having both psychological safety and a commitment to excellence, that we need both in relationship with one another. So I just loved that because it was a way of just capturing so much of her thought leadership and work out there in the world. What's standing out for you from what she had to say?
Yeah, I think it's just that it's really about if there are leaders of organizations watching and listening to this, I really want you to sit into this notion of, I'm calling it intellectual friction. But if you don't have that healthy friction on your team, you are not going to be able to innovate or create. And innovate and create during the pandemic and in the future are going to be critical.
Yes.
And I also like the fact that, something else I would say, and wouldn't mind to get your perspective, is that leaders that are leading teams right now, when you're hiring people, one surefire way to, I think, create and develop a trusting team is to express those core values in that recruiting process. So it's one thing that you have a team and there's distrust on the team, but really think about that as an integral component to the hiring, succession planning. Are these behaviors that are important for culture, like the CEO that you were talking about in the financial institution that you worked, or make it really clear that this is what you want?
Yeah, the expression of hire and fire against them. And I know there's spaces in between on, manage against them too, in positive ways. The values conversation is also really growing and really guides how we show up to create psychological safety balanced with those standards of excellence that Amy talks about. I think the big distinction for organizations and values is those who are actually operationalize them. And I think values really goes deeper than we sometimes think. We throw around the word values, but there's real depth to it. It shapes, I call values work a little bit like putting on a pair of glasses. And it's the way in which we see the world. It guides our values, guide our beliefs, our perceptions, some of our
100%.
ideas. And so operationalizing them with intention, with accountability and structures, I think it's really, really important.
In fact, I mean, in the leadership work that I do, I have been really heavy into right now, and I just thought of this as you were speaking, employee value proposition work, which is exactly that, identifying who are we as a team, as the idea, right? And who do we want to attract? And then the employee experience, from attraction to onboarding to coaching to development to retention to exit, is how it's the charter of how we treat people during that whole execution, but it's fueled by that value system. And if developing an honest, open, vulnerable, psychologically safe team, well, it has to be identified in that EVP.
I love that. So a couple things come to mind. Employee, we talked about customer experience and client experience, and we often neglect employee experience because we're looking for quick wins and we're in survival mode. Well, if we want a long-term, we got to look at the employee experience and the same psychological journey that our people need to thrive. It's going to be really expensive long-term if you don't look at that. I also think that in community, there's also volunteer organizations or volunteer boards, volunteer fundraising and charity work that gets done. These are still collectives. These are still communities. And if we're going to function and keep these people who are giving their time, I mean, I'm giving one example in community. Why wouldn't we also look at some of these same principles?
Yeah. In fact, I would say it's pretty much a requirement.
Because when we don't, some experience I've had in a former life, in a volunteer board structure, debatable, for example, if shared accountability is there. And if shared accountability isn't there, you might have a couple of people over functioning, then it leads to resentment, then it leads to trickle through effect. And then what the heck are we doing? So, and another thought too, we talk about leadership and the leadership role. I want to highlight the idea that there are leaders at every level.
Yes.
So if I'm a leader in an organization, maybe I'm a manager.
Yep.
I'm not yet a director. I'm not in the C-suite. What is my role in it? Do I look to the C-suite and get ticked off and fold my arms? Or what is my role in that? And it's interesting because it reminds me of a client conversation recently where this person is like, well, there's them up there and they're not. And then, well, what's your responsibility in it? What can you do with your universe and your influence, which is your team? Well, I'm not as senior as, and if you can't change the entire world around you, what if we start with ourselves in our immediate sphere of influence to model what's possible?
I had this exact conversation with a client the other day where, I mean, the bigger universe is perhaps not behaving the way that is congruent with their value system. And my advice was exactly the same.
Yeah.
You work and you manage your sphere of influence. You create the value system for your sphere of influence because that's what you can control. You can't control other people, but you can control yourself. I actually have a t-shirt somewhere. Maybe I'll wear it next time. That says
Pithy Musings t-shirt.
It's not a Pithy Musings, but what it does says is, and for those that know me, know I say this all the time, which is you treat others how to treat you.
Yeah.
So what that really means is that I can only control myself, and I'm going to treat you the way I want to be treated, and hopefully you'll follow suit at some point.
Yeah. And I wish that also reminds me of a quote, and I'm not going to remember it perfectly. I think it may have been a Maya Angelou quote of something around people will always remember how you made them feel.
Yes. Not what you said. Yeah.
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 Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Another thought leader you and I got all hopped up about, it doesn't take much to get us hopped up.
No, it doesn't.
Adam Grant has a
Yeah.
new book that he's released. Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And the idea that we think we have to be all knowing.
Yeah.
You know, in Pithy Musings, we're not all knowing. We're exploring these topics to challenge what we think we know, to put these thoughts out into the universe, put the funk back into being human. And there's a lot that we don't know and that we're still learning and that we're still challenged. It's ongoing. It's a learning mindset. And the courage, you know, part of creating psychological safety is having the courage as a leader at any level or a community participant in the world to say, you know what, you know, let's just take diversity and inclusion, for example. I don't know. I'm still learning. I'm going to make mistakes. I sure am trying.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest things to do is to speak up. I've decided to co-chair a diversity, inclusion, and belonging committee in one of the fundraising groups that I'm part of.
Good for you.
To make myself incredibly uncomfortable, and I am, because
Yeah.
I'm so learning and loading.
Yeah.
And what I've declared, which was incredibly uncomfortable, and yet I think it's important work and a contributor to psychological safety, is I've said to the group, and I now have a couple of co-chairs for sustainable work. And so I've declared there's a lot I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we could create a value or an agreement or a principle where it is a safe place to say, I actually don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's part of what Adam's message is. I just want to share a few things that he suggests on the idea of creating a learning culture and the relationship of a learning culture to psychological safety. And he's basically saying the foundation of a learning culture is creating psychological safety. And we need a learning culture in order to harvest the creativity, the innovation, and the sense of belonging that you and I have been talking about.
And it reminds me of Carol Dweck's work, right, where she talks about a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, really developing that growth. I want to learn and not, oh, we've already done it this way, right? Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's interesting because we know there's a quest for the learning organization. Well, what's connected to that to make that possible? So he's declaring psychological safety is a key part. They're in relationship with one another. So a few things that he offers for what I refer to as healthier cultures.
Yeah.
A place I know you and I are both very motivated to contribute to. So he says, and these aren't exactly in his words, but model openness and inclusiveness, embracing feedback without defensiveness, and acting on that feedback. He also offers demonstrate humility and curiosity, even when the feedback is really hard to hear. He's also saying hold or make imperfections visible. So model vulnerability, share learnings openly, enable others to feel safe to also do so, and enable us to connect with one another. And last couple points, hold people accountable for results, to think again about their decisions. That's the piece of it. It's not just go get your numbers. It's how are you making decisions and all of that. Do you bring your people with you in your decisions, or do you leave them on an island somewhere and not part of it? Welcome experiments where the decision process is deep. Rethinking the familiar. I love that. And think about better practices versus best practices and getting stuck in them.
You know, what I'm thinking of is we were talking about performance management. Like, why would this not be a metric? Why would, instead of goals, objectives, which I said last time, which is a mouthful. Why are we not nurturing these in a more formal capacity on performance? And also what comes to mind when he's talking about feedback. Feedback does not work in unpsychologically safe environments. So if it's I'm out to get ya, constructive feedback doesn't really work. If it's coming from a place of kindness and I really want to help you, that constructive feedback feels pretty different. And feedback is required because we're not perfect. We've said this now 800 times in the last two. Perfect doesn't exist. If you've met it, please introduce me to it. I'd like to interview them. We all need constructive feedback.
Yeah.
You can't do it in the absence of this trusting, psychologically safe environment. It doesn't work.
Well, you're talking, I think what I'm hearing is it's whether it's a fear-induced environment or a trust-inspired environment.
Yes. Thank you.
Do we want to go into, the sort of top few takeaways for folks?
Yeah. I actually feel like this could turn into a workshop, Eva. We've got a lot to say on this topic.
Oh, and it's so funny. I just want to share this with listeners too, because the ideas that we keep coming up with, like the lights go off because of our client work and our conversations together. There's just so much. And at the same time, we really want to hear from listeners too. If you have comments, questions, ideas, something that you think needs some pithy musings, we are completely open to what that might be. And, at some point, I think we might even end up, inviting other people into our conversations as well. So,
because we want to funk it up.
We do want to funk it up. And the people who are part of what we're doing with Pithy Musings, it's not just Caroline and Eva. Yeah. So it's also your voices as well. So
top tip.
What's that?
Top tip from Caroline's perspective. Just
Okay,
to bring it back to the tips.
Yeah.
I think if you're a leader in an organization, it does not necessarily, as Eva said, needs to be senior leaders, managers, whatever. Leaders are also individual contributors. Mm-hmm. If this is not on your agenda, psychological safety, it needs to be. I'd like you to really think about that employee value proposition and just start thinking about how can I develop, create, nurture an environment that's safe. Because by the way, it's just way more fun to be on a team that's got each other's backs. Yeah. It's way more fun. And if we're going to spend all this time working, let's have a little bit of fun. So that would be my top tip.
Yeah, and I would, we've covered a lot of ground. If there's something that folks have heard from some of our own musings and some of the thought leaders that we've covered off, I would encourage you to tune into places where you're strong. Yeah. And maybe reflect on places that strike your curiosity that you think you could strengthen. Yeah. If it means listening to this again, fill your cup of coffee, listen to it again. If it means, if it means doing a bit of a search on your own, you've got something.
I just have to say, we're not selling mugs or anything. We just are excited that we've got these mugs made.
Well, and Caroline, bless your soul, I all of a sudden get this great big box that shows up at I didn't even know that these were happening. And then they just show up at my doorstep. So that was super exciting and super grateful. And I absolutely love them. So, I would encourage, think about what we've talked about. What are your strengths? What are some humbly areas you could strengthen? I would also offer out there in the community, do some thinking around your role in bystanding. Yeah. And I think as well as you, if you are in an organization, in order for it to thrive long-term, you're going to need to focus on your culture and your people and creating a trust-inspired versus fear-induced environment. I think as a final comment, lots of thinking.
Are you musing, Eva?
I'm musing. What? I think that if you are in an environment where you feel literally unsafe.
Yeah.
That you have a right to use your voice. If you don't feel safe using your voice, you can also talk to, so this is talking more in an organizational environment, talk to HR.
Yep.
Get them involved.
Yep.
For some, it might even mean talking to an employment lawyer to understand what your rights are. And for some, if you don't love who you are when you're with people every single day, there's going to be some days where it's hard.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say every single day, but if you don't love who you are and your energy doesn't go up and you feel unsafe way too often,
yeah,
it might be time to gracefully exit.
100% agree with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, anything we didn't cover off before we close?
Oh, I think we covered it. And I think we could go for another hour.
I know. Okay. Well, we will draw the line. We talked about this mug a couple of times. So we've had a couple of folks. We are not getting into merchandising so far.
We should.
Maybe we will. I don't know. But right now, I don't know. We may down the road. So we would love to do a mug giveaway. So we want to offer, and this would be sort of from our first post when this gets released. So when Caroline and I release this into the world, if you are one of the first 10 people who comment on LinkedIn, you can say whatever you like. Make sure it's psychologically safe.
I was just going to say, let's make sure it's
psychologically safe.
Right.
So if you are leading from a place of psychological safety and you are in the first 10.
And you want one of these cool mugs.
Then we are going to do a random draw.
Yes.
Okay. Also, please stay tuned for our next episode. If you want to make sure and not miss out, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's called Pithy Musings. You can't miss it. If you have ideas, comments, tell us. You can reach Caroline Berglund at talktalk.ca. You can reach me, Eva, at livewithfervor.com. We also have the playlist.
Spotify.
That's right.
I listened to it right before this, by the way.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, we listen to it on Friday nights.
It's
so
Friday today.
Right? So it's on the way. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm so grateful to do this work with you, Caroline. It's such a gift. This is one of the things that dials up my energy. So thank you,
Eva. I will say this. I love your soul. I see it. I'm super grateful to collaborate with you in this space. As you say, interspaces. I feel 100% psychologically safe with you, and I can't think of another human that I would do this with. So thank you.
Oh, mutual. All the feels.
All the feels. So to our listeners and watchers, I'm going to do it. I'm going to close it out.
Okay.
Stay pithy. Keep musing. Love it.
Love it. Thank you.